in a different meeting. I don't know to what extent it can open meetings. Good morning. My name is Stephen Welch, Chair of the Capital Program Committee. Before we call our meeting to order, I have the governor's script for remotely conducted meetings to work through. I'll do this very quickly. I'll start by confirming today's Zoom listers have access. First, members, please respond as I call your name. As I see, I'm Richard Hussey.
Yes.
Pete Kaiser.
Yes.
Christy Kickham.
Yes.
Myself, Stephen Welch. Staff, Brian Turbert.
Present.
Thanks. Good morning, Brian. Let's see. Allie.
Here.
And Rick. Maybe Rick is not with us at the moment. Okay.
It looks like he left.
Okay. So Rick is traveling today on family stuff, and he's going to try and phone in and out as signal allows. So for today's remote meeting, please note the following. To mitigate transmission of COVID-19, the town of Nantucket has been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. As a result, this open meeting of the Capital Program Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. That order, posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to convene remotely so long as public access is reasonably provided to access deliberations. Note that ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This particular meeting will not feature public comment. This meeting is convening via Zoom video conference. This meeting is being video and audio recorded. Materials provided to the members for the meeting or provided during the meeting are, unless otherwise noted, available on the town's website. As chair, I will introduce topics and speakers on the agenda as they come up. If speaking, please hold until your name is called. All pleasant. Yes, all please be pleasant. All present, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, to state your full name before speaking, and to speak clearly for the minutes, and to direct comments and questions through the chair. Lastly, formal votes, if any, will be conducted via roll call. So with that said, I'm going to call this meeting of the Capital Program Committee of Thursday, August 20th, 2020 to order. It is a little bit after 11 a.m. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. And then the audio video announcements has already been made. There is no public comment. In your packet, next up on the agenda is the 2020 Annual Town Meeting Capital Appropriations. Ellie, are you able to pull that up? Or Brian, the packet, just if there's any question?
Yeah, I think Brian and I talked. I think he's going to share his screen with you guys today so I can listen to the meeting and also continue doing some open gov stuff.
Okay, great.
If not, I can share it. Brian, let me know if you're having any issues.
I could share it also.
Pardon me, Peter?
No,
I was just saying I could share it. I mean, if it's not, any of us can really do it, whoever it makes sense for.
there you go.
Good.
Great. A little zoomy, please. A little zoomy on zoomy.
What do you want me to do?
Can you make it a little larger?
No. Hold on.
Yeah, it's up there in the right somewhere, the little plus button. There you
Yeah.
go. A little more, that's just a little bit more. Okay, great. So if you don't mind scrolling, in the packet is the printout from the Excel PDF printout that, that Rick had sent in Excel. So at this point, it's just a question of whether anyone had any questions or comments on the what was approved for 2020 and what was not approved.
I have a question, Stephen.
Yes,
Richard.
please, Richard.
I don't see the boiler replacement for the school. I thought that was approved. Or am I confused?
No, that was removed. We actually are funding that an alternate way
Another money.
this year. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Should that remain on the list, or just for the sake of historical records?
It remains in the CIP software. It was not put forward at town meeting, so that's why for approval, or it was, I mean, we could probably just add it to the not approved capital from 2020, but that would not necessarily be consistent since it was a project that was funded in an alternate method.
Right.
So it becomes a little bit of a, it wasn't really approved at 2020 ATM. It wasn't really not approved at ATM. It was removed because we came up with an alternate solution for funding for it.
Okay.
So I'll, however the committee would like, I'll certainly, we can do whatever if you would like to include it somewhere.
Thanks, Christy. Good question. I'd suggest that we figure out a way to track it. I think just for you guys, we've got a kind of the outer layer of that onion is how we're tracking, how we will be tracking for this year, past years and future year requests like this from the school that are kind of rolled in under building improvements, and similarly airport, where they kind of roll it in under a particular heading. And it's not that it's not being tracked in the software, it's that I just want to be more comfortable with how we're going to be tracking it as an index and a reference, as like the little alphanumeric code, so that it's consistent from year to year for our purposes reviewing things. Christy?
Brian, just a question. You may have alluded to this in the last meeting, but to what extent the items not approved, were they based on the priority and description, or were they based on funding source reasons?
So with respect to the general fund, Christy, the ones that were removed were based on two things: funding source, i.e. free cash. At the time we made the decision to do that, we were not entirely sure and still in the process of reviewing how how fiscal 20 was going to end up, and also not entirely sure what fiscal 21 was going to look like. So we had discussed with the select board that we were recommending reducing the use of free cash from capital to primarily zero, which was consistent with the way that we've discussed with the rating agencies in the event of something like this happening, how we would manage it. And the raise and appropriate that were listed there for the stormwater, and the vehicles were all part of the capital exclusion that the select board committed prior to the ballot vote, that if it passed, that they would not use the raise and appropriate mechanism for those. So the ones that were listed as raise and appropriate in the general fund were all part of the capital exclusion that the select board made the determination, given the severity of the global pandemic, not to implement and raise taxes more than we would have necessarily needed to in fiscal 21.
Right. All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yep. Understand.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, there you go. I can see everyone again.
Just curious on the ones approved, just to jog my memory, the groundwater soil investigation for the airport, was that related to any of the PFAS issues we're having, or was that something that was pre-existing prior to?
That is wholly related to what is going on at the airport.
Okay. So that was like the first step when they first came to us and we added it in, and that got approved for 2020.
Yeah, so originally it was at the airport, originally it was 250,000 was their initial request, and prior to town meeting, it became clear that they needed at that point a slight increase in the cost, and there was a technical amendment to move it to the 500,000, which was what they had requested it become.
And with that term, is soil investigation, is that accurate, or I mean, they're mostly focusing on groundwater, right?
Well,
that was why it was a little misleading.
Yeah, it's all, I think, groundwater and soil investigation. I think it's a combination, because eventually, as they move through it, I'm sure that there's going to be other remediation that has to be done as well.
Possible soil remediation. And then just a general question for pre-approved, previous year capital projects that still, it seems like a lot of times the 2019 project will, be still underway in fiscal year 2020 and possibly still have some money left in 21. Do we have any kind of summary or are we going to get a summary of projects that are still in process? You know, for instance, downtown Pleasant Street and Main Street just had a bunch of cobblestone, you know, work
Sure.
done.
I mean,
Good to know and see that even given the times, pre-existing projects are still being performed that the money had been allocated for prior to this year.
So
sure.
that,
That's a great question. And Rick has been spending a incredible amount of time on Zoom or teleconference calls with all the department heads, going through all of the lists to get an idea of which projects have actually been closed and were on the list and could be moved off it. So we've been spending a lot of time consolidating the lists that we use to track all the previous prior appropriations. So that's something that we can certainly provide as the committee moves through their meetings with departments for a review or discussion or updates to the committee. But there are lists with what the funding, how much has been spent to date, what is encumbered, and what's available in the budget to be spent to date. So, and certainly something we can provide to the committee.
Great. Yeah, and I'm again just good to see that some projects that were in process are continuing, given the cash strap times, and don't want to shut everything down and really tighten up too much for some projects that everyone thought were worthwhile at the time when they were voted in.
Sure.
so guys, we're going to actually deal with that in our schedule a little bit more in detail, which will be on the December 21st meeting. We're going to be pushed for time. At this point, we don't really even, well, we'll get into discussion about that in schedule because it'll all be contextual. I think it's a great question, but I just want to pick it up in that context. Any other questions on the what's been approved, what hasn't been approved, or what didn't move forward due to town meeting? Okay, great. So if we could just flip to the Rorys, I think at this point, obviously there's a ongoing list of some refinements, and there's really two categories. One is refinements, which is primarily labeling, and then the other is a heavier lifting type of approach, which is working in other aspects of what we're supposed to be reviewing from the financial policies and procedures so that they can be valued into the RORI as a percentage relative to the others and then ranked on a per project basis. So an example of that would be the effects of funding, or perhaps total cost, which would be an upfront number of carrying charges as opposed to just what the dollar number sticker is in today's day. Those are types of things that are going to involve a little more, well, certainly more in depth, basically an overhaul of the RORI in terms of its layout, and then our going in as a group and actually determining what category to put it under, each of those under. They'll be pretty simple, but and then valuing those, which will be at least a day's meeting, and then probably a meeting with finance. And then I don't want to forget, there's also ramifications of that with respect to the database data, previous RORIs, and the database developer actually being able to implement it. So those are what I'm terming heavy lifting, and I'm suggesting given our timeline, which we still aren't positive what it is yet, and under this COVID situation, that we would hold off on the heavy lifting at the moment, and maybe even pick it up as a work group and come up with some recommendations for the overall group. The lighter things are, for instance, Brian, can you zoom in a little bit on the leftmost two columns? Just a little bit more. So the criteria we had discussed, and I'd like to just get you guys a sense of the meeting so we can move forward. I want to try and get less on process as a group and more on action, so that we can, I'll make a recommendation, you guys can be yes or no. If it's a no, we'll figure it out. If it's a yes, we just move forward, and then we can be focusing, not today necessarily, but in the future, so we can be focusing more on our primary role, which is reviewing requests, making a recommendation, reviewing the 10-year SIP. So along those lines, we had discussed swapping the descriptions for the ops high required and recommended. We had also talked about under resilience, changing strategic plan to mid or long-term plans. And the other thing is we had asked to put a project cost field in the top of each RORI when a particular project came up that we were filling out. So those were three relatively, I think really simple on the database side that would be helpful for us moving forward. And I'd like to recommend that we ask for those to be addressed prior to our taking up use of the RORIs. At that, I'll take any questions, comments, and then we'll go from there.
In terms of the first one that you mentioned, the ops high and ops medium, so that the swapping of that you referred to as preserve necessary function would be ops high and prevent degradation would be ops medium?
Yes, sir, thanks.
Okay, gotcha.
So you guys good with it? Christy?
Yeah, I'm just trying to process it and see if there's, overall, it seems like it makes sense. There might be a situation where where it is now is a better description, depending what we're talking about. But overall, I think that's probably pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, I've taken these from our notes and just repeated discussions last season. So they're not a new element that I'm suggesting. Sure. Richard, any thoughts on the additional thoughts or?
Actually, I'm kind of stuck on the not approved from the previous slide.
Well,
will these come
can I
before
ask-
us again to be re-ranked, or how will we deal with the not approved?
You mean with respect to
2020.
2022? Okay, so I'm gonna hold that question. Great question. But to process Rory, and then we'll pick that up in the schedule, which will be right after SIP request.
Fine.
Okay. Any questions on the Rory form? Okay.
Yeah, did we have any notes or were there any clarifications regarding continuity B? I feel like that's where we had the most, the most discussion in terms of heritage, tradition, culture, legacy, and then also scheduled replacement. It seemed like there was always kind of a lot of misperception between committee members on what those actually, referred to. And I think we got to a point where it was however you interpret it, it's your interpretation of it. But I just didn't know if there were any notes that you had or thoughts that we had on how we might be able to more accurately convey what we're trying to be voting on there.
Sure. So correct in the recollection, that tracks mine. I think where we left heritage, tradition, culture, legacy was that it's a broad description and it's meant to be a broad description and we all might interpret it a particular way, but that those 4 words denote a certain intent.
Essence.
And that it was acceptable subject to that intent that we might interpret it slightly different because after all, in the aggregation, even a major deviation by a few members in that particular area on the whole doesn't skew the result. Mm-hmm. Scheduled replacement was another one where this was one where Nat was primarily focusing on whether there was continuity between, is this a scheduled replacement in the big picture view, which is to say this is something that a department has scheduled replacement of a fire truck, or is this like a part that needs to be replaced? And I think that where we ended up with it was that breaking this down into subcategories is something we could do for future renditions. That's what's in my notes, so that there may be scheduled replacement and underneath that as a total value of continuity B that's made up of 2 constituent parts, which is scheduled replacement, large capital asset, scheduled replacement, small capital asset. I didn't bring it up because I think the utility of actually breaking those down into those 2 categories relative to the overall purpose of the RORI, it's so insignificant that I don't think we're going to get value out of it. But that's just that was my initial notes. And that's why I think if we have a work group that pulls this aside and works on it for the structural recommendations, which making subcategory changes would be, is that we could, we can go through this, and, as far as I'm concerned, insofar as it effectively tracks the financial policies and procedures, we can make any changes we want. So I think for this year, it's going to stay where it is, and we may have some questions about what scheduled replacement is, but again, it's not going to affect the overall.
I agree with that. Yeah, thanks for just clarifying kind of where we were last year, so everyone, can kind of revisit in our own minds, how we interpreted them last year, and how we should be thinking about them this year going forward.
Yeah, no, sure. Thank you. I think it's a good question. And if we've got them, it'd be nice. I was hoping the organization would be an opportunity to square these away, any of these types of questions away, which is why it's good to be doing it. So we're not dealing with it during the course of the meetings, but the world's not perfect. We'll do what we can. Christy?
I was just going to say, for an example like scheduled replacement, we're a committee, we're all different, and it really, that is scheduled replacement. We talked about, well, what does that define? What does that mean? Well, it's really each member's interpretation, and I think that there is value to that. However they determine what scheduled replacement is, or what heritage, tradition, and legacy is. If you were to give an exact definition that we were all to follow, it would kind of be a cloned result. So there's some benefit to the variety of how we interpret these.
Thanks, Christy. And I think that speaks to the overall model. This matrix was designed to take these kind of ambiguous aspects that are all based on subjective opinion and try and systematize how they're processed, but not necessarily systematize the individual ones. Mm-hmm. But I do agree it's important that we have a common understanding of what it's intended to mean, even if what it's intended to mean is that it's ambiguous. Yeah. And to that end, one of our notes, and I think one of the things that work group might work out is when we're using the RORI, certainly it'd be helpful at the beginning of each season, when you hover over a criteria, there'll be a little pop-up where there's any ambiguity or any uncertainty, and it could just say what it is that this is intended to measure or address. Does anyone believe that those little pop-ups would not be helpful? Okay.
I think it'd be a good idea.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts on the RORI at this point? Christy, please.
I'm just curious if you see any of these maybe in resilience as being, they're always going to kind of get the same answer, and maybe they're a little not redundant. It's nice to recognize some of these, but I'm just thinking some of these, I'm voting the same thing every single time because it is an infrastructure improvement. And, as far as alleviate overstressed or burdened, any of these requests could be just that to the department heads. So I'm just wondering if there's any that we see here that it's a given what the answer is going to be. I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, is there any other comments on that? Just before no. So yeah, and I think that's a two-part answer. The resilience portion was well, first of all, these are from the financial policies and procedures. So we're kind of bound, our rankings and priorities are bound by what's in there. Yeah. So we can always revisit those. The idea here was I don't disagree with you. I think I go through these, and most of the projects support strategic plan, which will be changed to support long-term or mid-term plan or to that effect. Those are actually included. They're almost like to help differentiate with a few points projects that aren't planned in advance. Personally, I would like to see support strategic plan. I'm just going to use the label that's there to, avoid confusion. I would like that to be 50% of the overall score. Because, frankly, if it doesn't support a long or a midterm plan, It means it wasn't in the process. It's not in the SIP, the 10-year SIP. And what we, I believe, looking for a 10-year period, are trying to encourage is a cultural shift within the municipality's planning process, so that long-term planning is rewarded. And therefore, you put it in the midterm plan, you put it in a long-term plan, boom. You know, it should almost be one of the highest ranked projects, not necessarily based on the other criteria, but on that criteria. Noting that obviously town admin isn't going to be advancing frivolous projects. So that is a filter for projects right there. Infrastructure improvements is similar. It's all capital. And alleviate overstressed, overburdened was, I think, a similar thing. And it comes out of the concept that as a municipality providing services and either services that are currently lacking or services that need to be expanded to prevent the overburdening. I know it's a lot of words, but that's why I think a work group, you know, might look at this and come back with recommendations if there are to be changes or not. I think personally that revoting this at a later point, resilience might take a higher overall score than 23.7% of the total relative to the other categories. I would hope that that's the outcome, but we'd see what happens. Christy?
Sorry, one more question. It's for Brian. Brian, in the where it says cost, is there any line item that you could see, I guess, out of these that you would add from your department, from your point of view, something where there's cost, something we should consider from your point of view? I'm just looking at these and I didn't know if there was something that you thought would be beneficial for us to put down and vote on. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, I'm comfortable with the ones that we have. I don't know that I would change many of them. I mean, we certainly will work with you guys if you want to change them, but I'm fine with the ones that we've chosen and use here. I mean, we do have in the SIP request, we are working towards getting a better way to identify what the costs are. So, and even the impact on the tax rate. So I think those, you know, probably play a factor into when you're looking at this already. So I don't know that I would want to add any more at this point, but
Okay.
You know, if the committee wanted to as a group, we can work with the programmer to make the changes to that need to be.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, thanks, Christy. So that actually is a great segue right into the SIP request form, unless Peter Kaiser has a question.
Yep, real quick, sorry. So Christy Parentel is going to have to do the same process that we did to generate her, you know, Rory priorities, and that's also going to impact our group's priorities on this, right? If I recall from the first time around that we did this.
Well, no, I'm thinking that, again, at this point, just because opening up that can of worms is going to be, it's just more lifting than we have time to address at this point.
So she'll use it under this same framework that was established when Nat originally did it?
Yes, subject to anticipating going forward, you know, maybe even as early as February or sooner, if we get through our FY22 and the 10-year sooner, we can pick this up. And when I say a work group, I'm thinking we have, you know, we're doing this in parallel once everybody has a little bit of time to breathe. You know, we are under a state of emergency still, not just with the town, but in our personal lives. There's a lot of ripple that's been going on since this happened. So, Christy, it would be, because of the limited resources, we'll be utilizing the framework and the valuations that are established. However, she would have an opportunity to weigh in not only on her own valuations, but on the programmatic aspects of this going forward. And then along those lines, I have shot her an email just to indicate if she wants to give me a call and chat. We can, you know, I can walk her through this, you not from my perspective in terms of personal subjective opinions, but in terms of what the individual criteria were originally established as and meant to value.
So speaking perfect world though, is that the process that it would take every time a new member comes in? They would go through this and do their own rankings, and then that would adjust the overall group rankings?
Yeah, definitely. Perfect world.
Gotcha. Just thinking procedurally, that's how this ultimately works, right?
Yes, definitely.
Gotcha. That was just my question. All right.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as a practical matter, it won't change much even when they do that. But
Yeah.
I think so for them to have a sense of ownership and involvement, I think that's an important step.
Mhm.
Um,
Thank
okay, cool. So the SIP request form basically is going to be, let me see what my notes here are. Look, I think the SIP request forms are working well. It's a matter of getting them completed timely, getting them timely and complete, which makes or breaks our process. And so our draft schedule, which we'll get to in a minute, includes dates we need to start receiving those, which I think is September 3rd for the sake of discussion. So we can keep our schedule with respect to the Select Board's 2020 annual town meeting timeline. Other than schedule, we'll pick up in a minute, for the SIP request form and with respect to timeliness and completeness, from pre-COVID-19 discussions with finance, Rick is point, or at least direct support on the request forms and other capital program committee needs. Obviously, I'm going to want to get verification for the committee on that. And it would also be good to map out Rick or other finance committee member involvement. I'd like to do that at our next meeting when everyone's in attendance. And it gives us a better picture of where we're going and how we'll get there, with the SIP request form being really our primary tool in terms of aggregating, receiving, reviewing, and aggregating information. So my comments then are timeliness, the department heads completing the information before it's reviewed by finance and forwarded to us, and making sure that the supplemental documents are in place. I think the saving grace this year will be that many of our requests, and we're going to pick up on this further, Richard, in schedule, is that maybe many of the requests are going to be from last year and we've already reviewed them once, but we'll see what happens there. On the SIP, so having said that, on the SIP request form, what are your guys' thoughts in terms of, is it collecting enough? Is it not being completed enough? What are your thoughts? Anyone in particular? No?
One thought thinking back to last year that I have is, so are these still being filled out, electronically in PDF format, or are they being filled out by hand and then transposed into electronic format?
I believe that they're being done online, but Brian can address that. I think they were designed to be done online so that the whole idea is to eliminate the redundancy of having to enter at one place and then doing it in another. Brian, can you comment?
They are completely online. We're not using any paper form whatsoever anymore. I mean, the department heads may fill them out when they're working on them, and then they put the information into, we haven't renamed it, but into Plum, into the software, but they are not, we are not getting the paper copies from the departments and filling and entering it. The departments are entering their own.
Okay, yeah, I think I recall it. There was some, not lack, but an insufficient kind of first glance description of the requests that we were looking at, I think. And this is when you pull it up on the website that we ended up getting access to by the end of the year. We could click on a request and then it would bring us to all the different tabs that covered everything on this sheet. And one of the things that I recalled was, trying to have to dig in really deep before you can find things like very, plain or very obvious information, like I think request amount even, or description of what the request actually was. And so I don't know if that's that's a topic for this conversation, but that's just one of the kind of not shortcomings, but one of the, I think on our wish list last year, where we could have had more of a general summary first open page that maybe condensed a couple pieces of information from all the other tabs. So, you didn't have to go digging through to answer a question. It might take a minute or two to get to the right place, but.
No, that's a good point. And yeah, it is on the list, right along with the what we've just indicated we'd like to have added for when we pick up with the Rorys. is having the project cost on the intro sheet.
Mhm.
And this would be the same, this would track that, is so that the SIP request form, for any particular request, there'll be a field on the intro sheet that includes the cost. And then also notes for now would be that the description is a little bit better presented. I do not, thankfully, I've downloaded from my brain that image of what that first sheet looks like. But if that's not on there, I think we would add that, the description, in addition to the cost of the project on the intro.
Great, thanks.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Brian, is that something we can also take up as an action item with the Rory changes?
Sure. I mean, we've already, we've undertaken, and they're in the process. It's, there's a development website where a lot of these changes are already being implemented. We have to remember one thing, that I'm doing all of these changes and paying for them out of my regular operating budget and still managing the entire budget. So these, to the extent possible, I can include them, but we've expended a significant amount of money to make some substantial changes, A, and B, figure out how to deal with what happened last year with all the projects that were approved by Capcom, and now need to go through the entire process all over again to be able to auto regenerate Rory's. So I'm keeping a list, and Stephen, you and I can talk about it after. But I probably will go with the ones that are the least cost right now to get them implemented and done, on top of what we've already programmed in. But we can certainly continue to work on it.
Okay. I mean, just for the record, I think these are going to be fairly easy, because it'll just be basically dragging a data field and a title into the database design
Right.
field.
Yeah, they very well could be, and to the extent that they are, we can certainly do them. To the extent that they're substantial hours of programming time, we may have to revisit how we do it in the short term while we plan to take care of it.
Yeah, I get that, and I support that, and which is why I'm not suggesting we do any of those types of things at this point.
Okay.
So that would be work group type stuff. On the SIP request form, any other thoughts? I mean, this is a good chance to talk about it. One of the things I would, and this is more structural, this is something I don't think we should be asking for, but this year, but I think a work group could take up, is to be able to actually print out a copy of the SIP request form as it was originally designed. Because then you can click on it, or you can you hit click, it's a PDF, and you can review it. For me, when I try to review things in detail, having to go back and forth between the tabs is problematic, whereas it has a great utility for the department heads when they're inputting information, not to have this, this big thing kind of slapping them in the face with respect to what information to input.
And that, Mr. Chairman, is one of the changes that's actually in development right now.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that sounds very helpful.
Yeah, really appreciate that. That'll be awesome. And just to say, I mean, this I think we've come a long way, and that's not, it's not noticed, and it's not appreciated. Okay, so any other questions on the SIP request form or comments? Christy, please. You're muted. Christy, you're muted.
Sorry, did you say you were making an adjustment or a change on the project description? One thing that I always liked that we used to do is not to get wordy, but more of a little narrative from the department head to explain what this was. Sometimes the words are a little bit better for me than just a check mark. So whether they improve on the description, sometimes it's like their description's like 5 or 6 words or 1 sentence, and it's sometimes it's hard to generate questions off of just check marks. So I'd be in favor of improving description of each item.
Yeah, or emphasizing with department heads to try to elaborate a little bit more on that description.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. And that's what I also thought for that opening tab on the website-based one that we get, you know, so you just have an idea before you have to go through and start seeing or figuring out exactly, you know, what the request detail is.
Sometimes we, you know, we all know that once in a while we get these, you know, shortly before our meeting sometimes, and just having a little blurb to read is helpful.
Agreed.
Right. So as opposed to saying townwide improvement of road, not to pick on any particular one, but that's the one that comes to mind, is like list 5 roads that you're going to be doing road improvements on. So you know, we can grasp it more quickly and get a sense of the totality of the project instead of just being a very general description.
Yeah, and the department head tends, or they have tended in the past to just give us a good idea what the project is in scope. And now they just, you know, check off what they think it is. And it just leaves a lot of, I think sometimes it leaves some, the option of some unanswered questions. And I just don't want to be surprised when something's happening, you know, that maybe we missed because we just didn't have give the question.
Right. No, that's good. The water company's always been good at it too. They typically put in, and sewer, they put in a, you know, like a list of what's being done.
Yeah.
Which I think is good.
And on the flip side, you know, I feel like every time that we meet with the department head, I could ask them that same question for every request, and it's probably a waste of everyone's time if it's something that they could put down on paper ahead of time, you know?
Exactly. The idea of these forms is to like answer questions for us, so we are not putting
to the meeting.
time into sitting with them. And then I think basically that's where Christy's going, is it answers a question to have that information there, and it also gives them an opportunity to think through what else might be involved, which is important.
I mean, really quickly, they're lobbying to have their request approved. You know, you'd
Right.
think that the more the better, but
Yeah.
Gives them a chance to really sell it.
Well, I think that might be something, you know, we can obviously, we've asked, I think, Brian to please be cognizant of it. And I think we just need to, you know, bring it up to department heads when they come in too, that give us some meat, you know, put some meat on the bone so we know what we're looking at. It's really a benefit to them. We're going to ask the question one way or the other, and if we can answer it in advance, we don't have to spend the time.
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that one of the focuses that Rick has been working with the departments on is getting understanding of what the projects are, and really kind of reinforcing the need for descriptions to be a little bit more descriptive, for a lack of a better phrase. So I think it is something that we are internally already working on to try to help facilitate the process and better dialogue and communication.
Thanks for sharing. That's good, important information. You know, I got a feeling Rick's presence is going to be transformational here with some of these little things that have been people's pet peeves, and not unreasonably so. Okay, great. So what do we got next? Schedule? Any other questions on the SIP request form?
You have reports next.
Yeah,
Unless
I'm going to roll reports and FY22 right into the schedule for the sake of time, and also because they're really schedule related items at this point.
Okay.
So schedule. So this season, I think the gist of this season is a couple things. This is the first year we're kind of doing a conglomeration. I wasn't aware of this, but we're doing a conglomeration schedule of the Capital Program Committee, the Finance Committee, and the Select Board's schedule, and other party schedules, all on, and those schedules are being used to fill the annual town meeting timeline. So that's one aspect of this. So that gives you the lay of the land in terms of what I've presented as a proposed draft, or a draft for our proposed schedule. The other is that, you know, we've had this kind of recently, as we've kind of matured our process and gotten more into detail, including the funding sources that track how articles are actually presented at town meeting, with funding sources and free cash and whatnot being an important part of our financial policies and procedures. Our report comes in later than when we just did a simple list with, you know, positive numbers and negative numbers to indicate our recommendation. And we stood there for 10 minutes and we answered some questions. The idea was that we would answer questions in advance so everyone could move on with their own reviews. But understandably, there are some concerns, and I think cultural, some of it is perception, some of it is factual, some of it is cultural. Be that as it may, it's kind of at our doorstep to try and address so that people feel comfortable with what it is we're doing and how we're doing it. So this season, we're taking a proactive role in scheduling, basically to help the Finance Committee review project request information early and often. That's for their own due diligence. The thing that I keep hearing is, well, we don't have time for our own due diligence. So, well, we don't have resources ourselves as a committee to put together early reports and several reports and so on and so forth. We need an assist from the finance department on that. And in the schedule, which we'll go over in a moment, I've worked those in, that assist. But the assist, just to be clear, are things that are in place. For instance, access to the SIP request forms. We all log in as they're turned in from a department, and we have access to those. And that's incredibly useful information if you're trying to conduct your own due diligence. So it's just a matter of working out with finance through town admin how to create that access and when. So that's kind of that. Brian, would you mind pulling up the scrolling down to the schedule?
Is this this one right here?
Yeah, that's it. And I just want to pull it up on my screen too. Just it's a little bit bigger font.
Well, is that better?
Yeah, that's good. And can the record reflect, hi, Christy F., that Christy Ferrantella joined us a little while back?
Hi.
Okay, guys and gals, so where we are with this is that I received a timeline of the conglomerated kind of schedules, which is the draft of the annual town meeting for the select board to review and endorse. The Thursday, I'm just going to start from the top and go through these. We are not going to go through these entry by entry just because I don't think we need to, but we can. There are some that are just redundant, which is, for example, when we meet with department heads, there's 9 or 10 entries for that. So I was just going to hit the high items, point out anything new that would be, we're trying to be collaborative and provide additional information, and that reflects our previous discussions and votes. So August 13th, this is more of a look back at this point for future use scheduling. Whomever that is, please mute.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry.
Thanks. Christy, would you just go ahead and put on mute if you don't mind, Christy?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know, I mean, phone calls are got to come in and we got to know what's going on. So I get you. Peter K. Oh, Brian.
Not me.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start again. August 13th, we met, we did an FY21 review, we did a broad scope of FY22, and we did an intro to new members of the organizational process. August 13th, this is an entry that was not on the draft annual town meeting, but since we're conglomerating schedules, what we're looking at here is not, I just want to be clear, what we're looking at here is our schedule. It's not our schedule. It's our schedule in the context of the timeline. It's not our schedule and we're telling the select board this is what we want. We're looking at our schedule to determine what works and what doesn't work. And it's based on last year's schedule. So in addition to basing it on last year's schedule where there are gating items or important schedule items, I've included in brackets where it was relative to last year's schedule. Those brackets are not intended to remain as part of the, anytime I put something in brackets, it's to convey a discussion point and it's to be removed at a later date. So last year in, I believe it was July, town admin maybe even June, town admin and finance had sent FY21 request information instructions out to department heads. So this is here just so we can track it. My understanding is that information, the request instructions has either already gone out or will be going out. I had hoped to get some feedback. Brian, can you just tell us if that's happened yet? And if not, when you anticipate it would be?
I think it's going to be probably very early next week. It's it hasn't gone out as of right now.
Okay, thank you. So the saving grace for us, y'all, with respect to not having our schedule pushed, you know, compressing our work towards the tail end, is that from my understanding, many of these requests are going to be last year's requests updated to suit the department needs, and that there will be some supplemental requests. Any concerns about the timeline at this point with respect to that particular topic? Okay. 20th and 27th, we're doing these organizational meetings next week. I do want to point to, I don't want to get into it now, we'll discuss it then, is liaisons and assignments, if you guys can think about that. Christy F., just so you're aware, what we've done in the past, we didn't do it last year, but we've done it for a few successive years prior to, is CAPCOM members are volunteer and they will visit with department heads in situ to review requests, maybe not details of requests, but just to get a better feeling of the nature of the request, the on-site conditions, and then have that information available to help inform the other CAPCOM members when we actually speak to the department head. What we found is that sometimes, you know, it just dispenses with literally several minutes of discussion on a particular topic when a member can report on it. So it's been useful, but I don't know that we'll do it this year. I'd like to discuss the usefulness depending on what type of requests we get this year. Are they new requests? Are they requests we've already reviewed? Any comments or thoughts just in general on that without getting into detail?
I was just going to mention, you know, in the past, as you had mentioned, it was very helpful to go to, I feel like, the department head buildings, locations, you know, sewer department, especially when you're, you know, walking around, you're looking at the improvements they're going to make to the wastewater treatment plant. So, you know, in light of the kind of restrictions or conservative nature of us going on site and actually visiting people, might be harder to get the full benefit of these liaison meetings. I mean, you could do a Zoom call with somebody, but really, how much are you going to be able to ask them that you're not ask them in a CAPCOM meeting where the department head's coming in person anyways, or by Zoom anyways?
Yeah, no, good point. I agree.
Might be limited in scope.
Any other comments or thoughts on Peter's? Okay, great. So the next one is August 31st. And this, again, is not a direction. This is our trying to understand when this particular item will be completed, because what I've done is I've outlined August 31st and the successive September 3rd date, which is a schedule related gating item, in order to be able to create the rest of our schedule, because all of these things flow from one August 31st, town admin and finance getting the department information, or at least the departments we're going to be reviewing first, and then being able to compile it so that it's accessible to us. You know, they have their own process that they need to pursue with respect to reviewing the data and its completion and so on and so forth before it gets printed, if you will, to the web for our access. So I put that down there as a date for discussion. I'd like to talk about that date in connection with the next date, which is September 3rd, which is really a schedule gating item, because our very next meeting, we would start to meet with department heads. Actually, I stand corrected. I want to correct myself. That meeting, we would start to meet with department heads on September 3rd in order to keep our schedule. So typically we started meeting with department heads in August, a couple weeks before. So to just give a little bit of, flesh that out and then have some discussion. On the 3rd, the idea is that we would receive a department completed SIP request forms prior to the 3rd, so we could review them so we could meet on the 3rd and discuss and then do the Rory for that department. I'm just talking about August 31st and the first entry of September 3rd at this point. So can we just have maybe a little discussion on that and get your guys' feelings on schedule, when we need to start, what information we need, and so on and so forth? Anyone? Christy with a K?
I just want to mention, if we do on the 27th, liaison assignments, that only gives us maybe 5 or 6 days to meet with them. Sometimes if you haven't met with your department before we start meeting with them in group, it sort of you're past due. And because anything else after that is usually items that go through you, Stephen, the chair, as questions for the department head.
Yeah. So do you want me to respond to that?
Sure.
So basically what I'm thinking there is some of these entries, like August 13th, the August 13th entries are basically for the integrity of the schedule for next time we pick this up next year. I'm thinking that my recommendation, based on similar to your comment and Peter Kaiser's comment, that the utility with COVID is that we're going to defer liaisons this year. But that actually should be in brackets, defer with a question mark, so that next year we pick up the schedule and we know, oh, okay, August 27th or thereabouts, we're going to do liaison assignments. Perhaps we would be doing it earlier, and I'll make a note of that, because I think last year we did them in June. Or I'm sorry, 2 years ago we did them in June. Last year we didn't do them at all. It was just kind of waived. Is that okay with everyone, that we'll just make a note to pick that up next year earlier in the process? Okay. August 31st, September 3rd. If there's no questions at this point, I'd like to get some comments from Brian in terms of how practical it's going to be to actually get a department in for our review September 3rd.
I guess it would depend on what department it is and what they have, to be honest with you. I mean, if we're thinking of like DPW or transportation, I would tell you probably impossible. If you're thinking a department like, just for discussion's sake, say IT or something, maybe more practical. It really depends on what department you were thinking of doing, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't see some of the larger departments being able to meet, getting them for the 3rd, but some of the smaller ones I suspect we could probably do, or ones that don't have a lot of 22 requests in already, or don't have a lot that are probably carrying over from 21.
Okay. Thanks, Brent. So what we've done in the past is we've tried to be, we've been extremely accommodative with respect to the size of a department, which was typically indicative of the number of requests they had. And the idea was a larger department had more requests, and we put them towards the tail end of the schedule because we wanted them to complete as much information as they could, so we could just sit down with them once versus scheduling and rescheduling, which is always what's been the case. This year, what I'm hoping, and I would like comments from you all on, is the idea of, it doesn't matter how big the department is, it matters whether their requests are completed in a way that town admin feels they can advance projects and we can review them via completed SIP request forms. So as Brian's mentioning, IT, let's use that as an example. They happen to be perhaps a smaller department, fewer requests. They would be, in my mind, a great way to start. So we're checking off, in part on our schedule, we're checking off and keeping our schedule, but we're also doing the lifting of reviewing the department. Does anybody feel like we should be doing particular departments in a particular order or handling this differently? No? Christy? Okay.
Can I make a comment after Christy?
Yeah, sure, Ellie. I didn't see your hand.
I know, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're on the phone.
I think that there's an argument that could be made with having the bigger departments almost go earlier in the process because there's so much back and forth with them and we almost always are asking for supplemental info. I guess like pushing them to the back, it gives them more time, like towards the end of the process, it gives them more time to get all their information together and have completed forms, but where it's usually a battle to get that information, I think if we start the bigger departments earlier, then with an initial review, there's more time throughout the process to get the supplemental info that the committee's asked of them. This year's wonky just because everything's on a tighter schedule, but that's kind of my 2 cents, because it's a back and forth regardless.
Okay.
I know that you're trying to mitigate it this year, but.
No, I understand. Thank you. Christy K?
I was just going to say, you know, we run into this every year. What are we really meeting for if no one is doing the process prior to our meeting? So I have no problem not reviewing anyone that hasn't submitted their criteria. And we review people that have and have done their part, whether a department is big or small. This is what the process is. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, last year we're looking at half finished items. It's just, you know, in my mind, no money if you don't do it. I don't know. It's just, that's my take. It's frustrating.
I appreciate the comments. I think that sentiment is shared by the membership. And Brian, can you please just address Rick's role in completed forms and timely submissions?
Well, I mean, Rick's role is really to be the interface and to make sure that departments, if they need help, we can provide them the resources to get the information in, or to be the, you know, the first review source rather than me of all of the projects that are in there. So when a department head puts a project in, you know, there are check marks along the way that require information to be filled out before they can save the project. Along the way, I think the only change really is making the supplemental information upload a requirement versus just optional and hoping that they do it. I mean, we're going to have to go in and check it either way, okay, to make sure that the information in there meets what we think is sufficient to be able to send to Capcom for review. So, I mean, his really is going to be the first step versus me having to sit there and go through them all. I mean, they come to finance and he'll get them and he'll look through them. And if there's information that's missing, he's going to send it back before we move forward and do it. So I think that he's really the gatekeeper to projects getting through to go to through the review process. Don't forget that first, in the perfect setup, not COVID-19 setup, I mean, most of these projects would be looked at by what we've called kind of like the town budget committee, but it's essentially, you know, the town manager and who she asked to sit on them where they're going through them all. I mean, I think that this year, you know, just to, you know, maybe answer Richard's question about projects, I think that, you know, Libby had mentioned this last week at the meeting, and I think that it's kind of the intention is that there's at least, if you look at what we had done with capital last year in terms of recommendations, there was over $6 million worth of capital projects pulled out of fiscal 22-21's recommendations that were made by the capital program committee. The majority of that funded by free cash. So I don't think that there's going to be a substantial amount of new requests for 22 other than the requests that maybe have come that were delayed in terms of what was recommended for 21. But you know, that's still, I think that ultimately is the town manager's decision on what we're going to put forward. But you know, Rick's role is really to manage this process for the finance department and for town administration so that we deliver and can produce documents that are that alleviate Christie's concern and what would be certainly relative to all of the committee members' concerns.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate
that. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
It does. I think it's helpful information. I think, you know, we're going to work through a little bit more on this topic before we advance. Christie, okay?
I was just going to say even though we say old requests, which sounds like it's going to be easier because we've already reviewed it, there also is a change in, I'm sure the estimates, departmental estimates for each request is probably changing too as time goes on. So there is a little bit of oversight still to do on those old ones.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that. And then
And prioritizing.
Yeah, I think the prioritizing, thanks for that segue, is really is another element, which is, what is the financial condition and circumstance of the town, which has changed or may be changing dramatically relative to last year before COVID. Seems like COVID was last year it started, but I guess it was only March. I think the ideal is obviously that we back up this whole process. We've been discussing and talking about this for, I think this will be our third season we're talking about it, but we didn't have the resources to implement it. And that is starting the process earlier with individual departments so that, the philosophy and the strategy of whether we do a big department first or a little department first, I think there's debate on either side and pros and cons on either side. But the bigger picture with respect to processing information is that we would start earlier. It would become more of an annual procedure so that we can finish our reporting and other parties have information earlier. But also getting them individual SIP request information earlier so that, for instance, the FinCom feels comfortable with a particular project. And if they don't feel comfortable, they have an opportunity to voice concerns, which we may determine that we want to take up or not as an independent, review committee. I think the request, with respect to supplemental information, just Christie F, so you're aware of what's going on there, is a lot of times we always request that there would be backup detail provided. So for instance, with respect to a fire truck, we'd get a printout, maybe an Excel little few cells or a narrative explaining where this fits into the larger schedule, what that schedule looks like, what the particular fire truck is, another tear sheet being the costs, so that we have, we feel comfortable that we've completed our due diligence and or it will create questions that we ask department heads. My suggestion last year out of frustration for the committee was to suggest, and certainly not require, that those items be submitted to the finance department in order for the request to be submitted to the finance department. So what I mean by that is the department head could save their request without it, but they could not actually submit it without it. And part of my frustration was not just for our committee, but it was for the staff, the finance staff. It's not my place, but interacting with them directly on a regular basis in this crunch time when we were getting ready to review requests, they don't have the information, and it puts them in a tough spot because they need to then advance it to us. And if we don't have the information, it puts us, a volunteer group, in a tough spot to say to department head, no. So I think that the onus needs to be on the department head. I will again suggest that submission of supplemental information be a requirement, noting that if you submit a blank page in order to advance your request, that's a different issue. And that's an issue with town admin, with a department head. The issue for us is whether we're getting the information or not. I think Rick will be a big help with us trying to develop a schedule that can be reliable. Because don't forget, a lot of this feeds, I'm going to move off this, but I'm sorry. A lot of this feeds into when are we going to sit down and actually do a 10-year SIP plan versus just generate a list so that we can, be really fulfilling our mandate, planning ahead, so that the idea with that is we're planning ahead so that the SIP 10-year plan is dealt with much the way the finance committee does, which is every year a department head would come in and they could identify exceptions or changes to the 10-year SIP, and we might focus on those already having focused on the individual projects. There's just a lot of time that goes into this otherwise, and it's very wasteful. So I'm hoping I'm very hopeful that Rick's role will be transformative and it will allow us to help, it will help us to jump on top of the rest of our charge. So anyways, Brian, back to the original question, are you confident, because we need to be making other determinations that, or not, are you confident or not that we'll have a department to begin reviewing on the 3rd, or to review on the 3rd? You're muted, Brian.
Sorry about that. I would, quite honestly, I would have to talk to Libby, Stephen. I don't want to make that decision for her. That's really a decision for her, and I don't want to commit her to something that I can't deliver on.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm just looking for information for.
And I have a note that I need to talk to her and can report back to you about whether we can deliver on that. Again, I don't want to commit her and everybody to something that can't be done today.
Okay. So so that sets the stage for the rest of our discussion with respect to schedule, is that, you know, we're going to keep our date at the end. I was sent a date of the report being due. We submit our report for presentation. It'll be Wednesday, January 27th. Last year, we were originally scheduled for February 5th. We moved that up later in the schedule to January 29th. So the dates track. I feel very strongly we need to keep that date, but we're going to have to make accommodations, and not just the committee, but everyone is going to have to make accommodations. I don't think it's fair for our committee to be held to one standard and everything else to have slid because of COVID. So I'm not suggesting we're not going to do more than our level best, because it's just not how I like to operate. But I think we all just need to acknowledge that we're all under different pressures, and we're going to do our absolute best to move it forward. Any comments on that general sentiment? Because, you know, I'm basically operating in a situation now where I'm representing Capcom's sentiment to other parties, because we're not doing our schedule solely alone. We're doing it more interactive, which I have absolutely no concern about. No concern or issues with. I think it's important that we be collaborative, but I want to be sure that, you know, the sentiment I just expressed is the sentiment of the committee, and if it's not, to please voice your opinion. I don't want to be speaking for you guys and gals in a way that doesn't represent your concerns. Okay, so the September 3rd, the next September 3rd entry is basically this keys off discussion we've had, and it keys off our vote last December to not have to help the FinCom be prepared to pursue due diligence. And how we would do that is we would help them to have access to information early and often. And this particular entry is meant to represent that as we receive a department's completed SIP request forms, and we have access emailed to us saying, hey, IT is in, feel free to review it, that the FinCom would receive similar access. They can log in, they can review the information that's there. It's just a matter of creating login credentials for them, as opposed to changing any of the reports or anything at this time. Later on, the idea is that the FinCom would have access through database development. I'm not talking later on, like in October or November, given COVID and concerns Brian had just stated about not having funding and so on and so forth. But later on in our process, as the process matures, they would be able to design a report so that they could, or reports, so that they could access the information that relates to the particular year's requests or prior year requests, or any requests within the 10-year window. They could organize that information into a report or reports that they would simply be able to log in and click to print to a PDF, so that they could view it at their leisure and comment on it upon as they would, either at their meeting, to their rep for Capcom, to their rep for the select board, or however. So I know that's a lot, but the idea is that this is an important step in developing early often sharing information on SIP request forms. I'd like to have a little discussion on this if anyone thinks that this is not a good idea. I'm not talking about the date. The date would simply be keyed off of when we receive particular department's information, but the concept is what I'm concerned about. So does anyone would like to comment, please? Or if you agree with the sentiment, just say I agree with the sentiment. Richard, I'm sorry, you're muted.
I agree.
Okay. Is there anyone who disagrees?
I agree, Stephen.
Again, I'm trying to do better, and I'm hoping that this helps. All right, so that date then with respect to the schedule is going to change if the September 3rd start date changes. I think that's just, you know, a statement of the obvious, which sometimes I am the master of. September 10th, 17th, 24th, October 1st, all of those are just dates that we would normally be processing individual departments, looking at their particular requests for the year and getting into out-year discussion. At this point, because we don't have legs under a 10-year SIP, the out-year discussions are really just, you know, what do you see and has anything changed from the prior year? Obviously, there's more depth to the discussion, but that's, I think, a fair summary. Thoughts on our changing how we're approaching these particular types of meetings, of which there are 9 or 10? No? Okay. We don't, Christy K, I see you've unmuted. We're going to have a meeting next week. We can talk about this stuff some more. I just wanted to, you know, kind of get it broached. Christy K?
No, I was going to say I concur with what you were on our approach.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone disagree with the approach? Okay. It's okay to disagree. Just don't be disagreeable. The idea is we have candid discussion and we make sure we've hashed things out. Okay, so October 7th, this is newish. This is not ours to do. We don't have the resources for this. It's a suggestion that I hope to just speaking to Libby about. I'm going to give a very brief intro on it and then see if you have any thoughts. Basically what happens with the select board, and I found it very useful to monitor whether we as a committee are missing feedback, important feedback from the select board, early feedback, is that Libby O'Brien, town admin, has been presenting these kind of a capital projects update. And it's a report, I think it's a PowerPoint or some slides in the select board packet. And it's proven very useful. What the suggestion here with that background information out of the way is that simply the finance committee received the same report. It gives them an opportunity to see this information through town admin at their regular meeting as a regular agenda item. And again, now that they have, we're layering this up for them so they have information early and often. They have the SIP request form data. In September, they can start going through those. They'll have the bigger picture view in October if town admin is agreeable to this approach. And it gives them an opportunity to comment either directly to us or to the select board or to their rep who can comment to us. It gives us an opportunity to understand what other people's concerns may be and then to evaluate them under our own charge. So are there thoughts on the utility of that? Are there thoughts that maybe it's not a good idea or it's a good idea, or that we should be doing it more than once a month or requesting it more than once a month? Personally, I think once a month is enough. I think that's what it's been done with the select board. And I will ask if Brian has any comments. Certainly, I know you're not speaking for Libby, but if you want to flesh it out. Thank you. Anyone?
I think it'd be wise to limit the scope of the conversation a bit, just so it doesn't get too granular into specific requests that we may not, have received all the information on, or, departments that we haven't yet discussed with, but we have preliminary idea for what they're asking for. I I wouldn't want it to turn into you know, a shooting gallery for questions that we don't know the answers to and then make ourselves look unprepared.
So thank you, Peter. I'm just going to comment on that before anyone else. The idea here is to avoid that because there has been, and I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but there, at least from what comments I've received from people, is there is kind of an animus involved in some of our reporting. And I would, when we do it ourselves, I'm not suggesting to sidestep that. I'm not suggesting, and to sidestep the shooting gallery, I'm not suggesting we actually would provide this report. I'm just suggesting it would be what town admin already supplies the select board, just broadening it out to the finance committee. On the particulars of whether they bring up projects we haven't answered questions on, I don't think anyone wants to sit there and answer questions that they don't have information on. But I would encourage the finance committee members, if they have questions, to put them down and either, again, through their rep or through staff, and then we can take those questions up when we actually do the department. Because I'm looking to open up the conversations without it being more of a source of conflict or concern, like under the shooting gallery example. We're still getting their questions or we're getting their concerns. And again, we're evaluating them under our own charge, and then we're evaluating them relative to the request. Sorry, the office cleaner is here if you hear that in the background. So any other question? Peter, does that help to address your concern or no? Or
Yeah, no, just again, just making sure that the scope is somewhat limited and that there's an expectation going in that any questions that might be had were more of a conduit to get answers for than to be readily available to answer questions on behalf of, you know, town departments or requests that we may have not had the chance to fully tap for information.
Gotcha. Makes sense to me too.
Mm-hmm.
Christy, okay, did you have a?
I'm sorry if I missed something. Is this for the select board and the finance committee to ask us questions or update us on their new, or is this for us to give them, and how, is this to sort of pare down the final report or?
No to all those questions.
All right, good.
And and I'll just elaborate because I'm not doing a good job apparently. So I'll try to do better. Currently, during once a month, I believe in October, November, and December. I know it's October and November. I haven't reviewed last year's December report. Libby or Brian would present a report titled something to the effect of FY21 capital projects update. All I'm suggesting is that that report be broadened to the extent that it also be supplied to the finance committee during one of their regular meetings. And then they have an opportunity to ask the bigger, broader level questions of town admin at that point. They also, because we've started back in September to provide SIP request forms, have the opportunity to direct any questions they have about a particular request back to us or to town admin. None of these affect our final report. None of these affect the, in terms of paring it down or cutting it back. I'm suggesting we open up communication earlier and often, not close it down. Does that answer your question, Christy? You're muted.
It does. Yep.
Does that work?
It does. Yep. No, that's great.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? I thought I heard someone in the background. Okay, great. So obviously that is going to be subject to Libby, whether she thinks she can do it. Again, I don't see lifting involved. It's just a matter of including it in a packet and maybe answering some questions. I think initially there's some lifting involved because it's new and people are going to wonder why is this here and what is it doing. But I think that it would help. Well, its usefulness goes without having to be extrapolated on further. October 8th, we would do a regular meeting. October 15th is kind of a catch-up meeting, looking at any of the requests then to date I want to pick up something though. Richard, you had asked, I apologize you guys, but I want to go back. Richard, you had asked about the what requests will be forwarded, advanced from FY21 that were not funded, they didn't go to town meeting, there wasn't an appropriation. I anticipate that will be brought forth to us at our first meeting with just a quick, similar to the spreadsheet we received already, that indicates these departments will be likely be advancing these particular requests. So that we have that and we kind of know in advance on a department basis. The alternative to that is that it's brought up to us when a department comes in. We see the SIP request. It's been flagged that it was a prior year request in the notes, and then we can move forward with that. So are either of those not acceptable to you, just so I have an understanding? Richard? Oh, thumbs up. I got a double thumb. I wasn't sure if that was shooter fingers. Thank you. And I'm not asking to ask pointed questions. I'm just asking so I understand. Okay, great. October 15th, look back review. Basically, this may be it sounds like this may be a meeting if September 3rd can't be our start date, that is really a flex date. Historically, we have had, this is more for Christy F, just so you have an idea of the some of the challenges we face. We've had to dedicate a meeting to looking back, or the better part of a meeting to looking back at open issues, because request forms have come in without being completed, or they weren't timely. So we were kind of addressing various departments, various matters that were left open to try and catch up. The reason we had recommended there be a position for capital related projects was to prevent that. It sounds like that type of activity, which we found very wasteful. And we believe that, I believe from comments to date from everyone, Brian and Libby, that we've addressed it. So it'll be good. We'll have this meeting. We can use it if we need to for regular reviews. 22nd to 29th, November 5th, and November 12th would all be the same type of regular processing of FY22 requests for whichever department. On the 12th, which, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to put it in the schedule. I thought that right around then we at least had identified, Libby had identified select board and town admin sponsored requests. But I wasn't sure we'd actually gotten into any meat on those until a little bit later. Do you have a recollection on that? We typically didn't schedule it, but I'd like to put it in the schedule.
I mean, first thing I would say is that any town admin requests would probably be filled out in advance. If there was something that the select board was keen on wanting to go through or keen on having happen, I mean, I can't remember how we handled it in past years, to be quite honest with you. There's something that came out of a select board discussion. I think we'd put it in as soon as we knew about it somehow. I mean, somebody would obviously have to put it into the software, which is probably going to be Rick, and just because he's not on the call, I can, we can ask him to do it. But I don't know if we really dedicated a specific meeting to those. I would envision that if they came up through the process, we'd put them in and just work them into the schedule when we felt was most applicable, unless you wanted to dedicate a specific meeting to them.
I'm thinking that it would be helpful to target a date, and then if there aren't, for the reason of we can focus on town admin select board related topics all at once, kind of like we focus on a particular department, acknowledging of course that there's a wide variety of what the requests cover, but at least it gives us an opportunity, I think, as a group. That's another one for Libby to look at. It's just that we are at that point running out of regular meetings to pick up requests. So I kept that towards the end, noting that the week later, the select board would actually be voting on town sponsored articles. So it seemed like that might be a good place to put it. So there, obviously after we endorse our schedule today, to the extent we do, there's going to be flexibility in some of these things because we need to get input from Libby.
I mean, my only observation to that would be that putting it there, just depending on what the projects are, could have a wide breadth of department heads that need to be involved in, scheduling. If we had them earlier, which, we can work through, I guess, is just they may be able to be worked into their original presentations, which is why I was saying that may be a slightly better way to do it, but we can accommodate and work through it either way. That's fine.
So you know what, maybe what I'm just going to suggest, this will be, instead of select board town admin's sponsored requests, it'll be mop up.
Okay.
That's not terribly technical, but that'll convey the fact that this is like a after the fact, if there are any lone wolves that don't fall into a department. For instance, well, we don't need an example. Let's see. The 19th is a flex date. We typically need a placeholder because we typically have items that have not been processed. It also gives us the opportunity that it's typically been required to look back and review any of the requests to date and resolve any lingering open items on a request basis, as opposed to internal Capcom workings. These are all these lingering type things are request related. Okay, so then November 20th is the same as, November 20th, the concept here was, last year we voted that the December 16th meeting, basically we felt like we were being, in some parts, asked to rubber stamp. It was a chance for everyone to come in and weigh in on our report, which was problematic in two regards. One, it can't be complete because we don't have the information to actually structure it. We have request information, but we don't have funding sources, and our report is intentionally structured as a matter of diligence to track how articles are put into town meeting. So what that means is that, for instance, capital exclusions affect the tax rate, and we report on the tax rate, and there's no way we can have that information before early mid-January. So it's always and that's, I think, where part of this has started, is in our diligence and maturing of our process, it had created a concern with the FinCom, and I'm not speaking for them, I'm just sharing my perception. It had created a concern for them that we were submitting our report late and asking them to rubber stamp it. Now, clearly, FinCom's approval up or down of a particular request is not contingent upon our report. So they can act as early as they want or as often as they want on making comments now that they have the SIP request form. So they can be involved in the due diligence there. As we proposed here, they will be getting monthly reports on the bigger picture from town admin, finance or town admin, if Libby agrees. So they can comment at that point. What this would be is a follow-up where we would all get together if they wanted to, or it could be the select board, the FinCom, and town admin could ask department-related requests. Our position, Christy, just so you're aware, where we came out on this after some really lengthy discussion, which didn't show up in the minutes, which we've held, by the way, was that basically we want to be available. We want to help provide information on requests early and often. We want to be available to answer questions on our means and methods. And when our report is issued, on the results of our recommendations, but that it isn't our place, and I agree with this, to represent or defend a particular request. That's really up to the department head. They do that in great detail to us as a committee, but typically when it comes to the select board, any type of that is done, if it's not done in a regular department update, my observation is it's done through town admin. So the idea was that this would be an opportunity early in November or late in November, before the Thanksgiving break and everybody's mind turns to the holidays, to take a look at and have questions and answers on FY22 capital requests. At that time, Capcom could also be available to review the status of the 10-year SIP, which at this point is just a list. But we could expand on that so people understand that, we understand that we have a job to do with the SIP and it needs to be more than a list. And we could give an update on some of the workings towards that goal. So I guess what I'd like to do is just ask, does anyone, because I want to be clear in what it is I'm trying to accomplish. Before I take questions or comments on the topic, does anyone have a question about what it is I'm trying to accomplish or what this particular entry means? Peter Kaiser? No? Okay, I saw you pop in. Christy? No. Okay, great. So are there any thoughts on whether this is a good idea, it's a bad idea, it should be earlier, it should be later? Obviously, this is not something we decide. This is a solution we're offering up and our involvement with the 10-year SIP. But I'd like to get your thoughts on it if I may. Okay, I want to pause for a moment. Allie, are you there?
Yes,
Could you please let
Hi.
Christy with the K back in?
sorry, yeah. He should be in.
Okay, it looks like he's back. I see him. I don't see his video. I see, there he is. Okay. So the other thing I want to say this, I don't have an intention this season to be talking about, and Christy F., this is actually just a comment so you're aware, it was made earlier in the meeting. This is obviously an organizational meeting. These are obviously new types of things that we're looking for solutions. But my goal in the meetings is where we have process related items to address is that I'll be bringing them forth for consideration and discussion, but without a lot of introduction. Part of the reason there's a lot of introduction at this point is that there's kind of a microscope on our interactions with the FinCom, and there's a perception that's been voiced that we're not doing our due diligence and we're not helping them do their due diligence. And my patience with that matter aside, because I don't think it's relevant in this meeting, is that I want to be sure that I'm articulating what our intent is so that that's not misconstrued or misperceived. So I apologize to everyone if it appears like it's a little bit extra talk, but I think it's important. Back to November 20th. Were there any questions, comments, or concerns about this approach from the Capcom's position or a select board member from the select board's position? No? Okay. So am I to take that there being no dissent, it's a unanimous support and consent? I see all the heads and thumbs shaking. Okay, thank you. December 3rd. This is another thing we never actually put in the schedule and we just tried to address. But since we're looking at our schedule as a conglomeration of a timeline with respect to annual town meeting, like select board and town-sponsored articles, it seemed important to put this in as an actual schedule item. So primarily the meeting would be to review and discuss citizen requests, if available, if any. To then have a preliminary discussion of funding sources. Typically at this point, and as Brian alluded to, actually very directly stated at our last meeting, funding sources are not something that are available early in December, but there may be a broad stroke, and that helps to give us a sense, and this year more so, where we may be in very tight fiscal times, of what it is, how we may be recommending funding sources. And funding sources are a structural element of our recommendations. So having an idea of this early is important to us. So I went ahead and I put that in there. A recap to date, resolve any open items to date, and a preliminary review of the RORIs. The preliminary review of the RORI, the prior members will understand this right out of the gate. But Christy, for you, just so you're aware, that's when we'll review individual comments or questions on RORIs that we didn't pick up after or during a department review. And it's also an opportunity just for us to start to look at them in the bigger picture as an amalgamation where they fit relative to one another, and if it all makes sense to us before we start to really hone in on the amalgamation of the RORIs. I know that sounds very obtuse, and in a way it is, but it'll make total sense to you when you look at it later on in the process. December 10th was to, again, which, I'm taking from my notes, address lingering department requests, recap the RORIs, do a preliminary final of the individual RORIs for the up-down list, which is the amalgamation, and any town admin select board sponsored requests could be finalized. And at that point, again, just because we're looking at our schedule in a broader context, I added to initiate the finance, the wording on that's a little odd now that I look at it, but it was late when I started to think about this. Initiate finance report support. Basically what that conveys is that we're formalizing that that's when I'm going to start relying on Brian, who's very accommodative and patient with me, and all my requests for information. That's just to formalize it. That's when that typically starts. Any questions on those two comments? Christy K, please.
So I'm sorry, the December 3rd, when you say citizen requests, are you referring to funding of citizen articles?
Yeah, so if there's a, sorry, I just got a quick chat. Christy had to pop off, Christy with an F had to pop off. So we still have a quorum, but I wanted to let you guys know that, and for the minutes. Christy, Kay, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I was just curious, the December 3rd citizen requests, is that to review the funding of citizen articles?
Yeah, that would kind of be an introduction, and actually I'm going to carry that over to the November 10th meeting too. Bear with me while I make a note. And that would basically be, for instance, I don't know, the Neighborhood First program came up. We never had an opportunity to review that. There's some, I think there's some reasonable debate whether we would have weighed in on that or not, because although it was funding for capital related appropriations, the mechanism, and it wasn't necessarily a fixed asset. So that discussion aside, probably not a great example to use, but that would be an example of what we might address at that meeting. And follow up on the 10th to wrap up. Does that answer your question?
It does. That would go under kind of newish.
Yeah, the new ones, I didn't highlight that as newish just so, because I wanted there to be no misconception with the other involved parties being town admin and FinCom when they get a copy of this, and Libya has received a copy, that, new meant it was wider than just capital program. It involved other parties.
And just so I understand it, are these items that you would deem necessary to discuss, or would Brian or town administration bring these to our attention?
I think that's a great question, and I think it might be a little bit of both. And I think that what we would do is, looking forward in our schedule when we've had a chance to breathe, we would make that determination. And I would ask you to, I'll make a note, but I would ask you to bring it up. Like, what's the process that we're going to follow, right? Like, are we just going to say, oh, there's a citizen article, we'd like to review it because it has some connotation with capital, direct or indirect? or do we want to rely on town admin bringing it forward, either directly as a managerial administrative thing or by the select board? I think there's value in all those, but I think we should have a discussion about it and kind of have a clear understanding amongst ourselves and also for other parties who may be involved, like Libby, what we're thinking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, even for committee members, I would say if there's an article that you see or feel it has an impact on capital funding of the current year or the out years, then discussable.
Yeah, and in a cooperative fashion, I mean, just to open it up, FinCom may say, hey, this is something we'd like the Capcom to look at. So, you know, it's not necessarily just the few players that have been identified. Other thoughts on that one? Okay, we're up to the 11th. So this is new. Last year it was the 16th, where we had this joint meeting. We had a discussion prior to the meeting. We determined that what we would provide would be our rather detailed information from our Appendix A in its preliminary form because it hadn't been resolved with funding sources. And that we had a joint meeting. It was, you know, a bit of a debacle, I think, for a variety of reasons, not least of which was the perception of what it was meant to accomplish. It was not meant to be a shooting gallery. It was not meant to be the Capcom defending a particular request or not. It was really meant to be an opportunity for FinCom and the select board to bring up questions with department heads there if there were questions on particular requests, and for us to be there if there were questions on our means or methods, because we hadn't made a recommendation at that point. The discussion afterwards was that it felt kind of inappropriate for a couple of reasons. One was it could easily be perceived, I'm not suggesting this was the primary uncomfort, but it was certainly one of them. It could easily be perceived that we were, you know, open to pressure on what our final recommendation was, because we're having this pre-meeting before our report is issued. And the other was that there were more effective ways of getting information out early and often, which is what I've brought into the schedule based on our discussions, which is getting the finance committee and the select board copies of the SIP request forms as they're available to us, the completed SIP request forms, having the capital project update on a month basis from town admin, probably through finance, I imagine, I don't know, which is basically exactly just what's already being supplied. Excuse me, sorry, which is basically only what's being supplied to the select board already, so there's no additional report creation or lifting involved in that. So that was what we did on the 16th. This was meant to replace that, and it was basically to kind of close out and update the capital project review process. We've given them the details through the SIP request forms. Town admin has provided overview. We're telegraphing, without getting into a pressure situation of rubber stamping, our ups and downs in terms of what our recommendations will be and what we anticipate the dollar numbers will be. From that, questions may be generated that we can answer, which are through the Capcom reps to the individual committees, which are, well, why did, you know, what's the dollar amount here? Why, you know, why did they say less or more? So that's the idea, and I'd like to get your guys' feedback on it. And that'll almost wrap us up. Richard, did you look like I took too long to explain that? No? Are you good with it?
He's reading something else.
Oh.
Or it might be frozen.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I just saw a little bit of a smile there.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's reading something else. I wasn't sure what okay. But I would like to get your guys' feedback on this, because this is, it's a little bit, it's not different than what we discussed and voted in essence, but it is different for other people. We are not prepared to, we've never issued a preliminary report, and I'm not prepared, nor will the committee be prepared, which is really the more important point, to provide a preliminary report at a joint meeting and then have it turn into a shooting gallery because we don't have information that we need to complete our report.
Mm-hmm.
Christy K.
Well, I mean, I think it's, I mean, any little, updates and, is helpful, but I also respect the continuity of what our process is, sort of, untouched a little bit. We may have done a lot of work, but things could change in some of those meetings to where, might have wasted the time that we did work on, but, then the report we have is not our full attention report. It had inputs from others outside the committee to help us arrive at a decision, whether, I don't know, I might not be making sense, but I like the continuity of our process. So updates sort of intrude on that a little bit, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a question to see if, I think updates with a back and forth discussion on, updates are not the issue. It's, providing information is not the issue. It's that this close to our report, having a back and forth discourse kind of taints the otherwise pristine nature of our process. You're muted. Christy K, you're muted.
I like our decision to be, our decision, and our report to be fully our report. I can understand if a project has been taken off the shelf, good to know that. But if another committee says, well, we like it to go this way, well, it changes what our decision might be. Our independent decision. Let me put it that way.
Okay, no, that's important feedback. That's what I'm trying to understand, and that's what I thought. But Peter K.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to try to limit the Q&A portion of it, to maybe things that are more procedural and not so much request by request. Because I mean, I do agree. We don't want to get in there on December 11th and get a bunch of, well, we think this about this request, this about that request. You guys should rethink, half of what you're doing, and then, we'd also don't want people to see what we present on December 11th and then compare that to our final report and have, some major discrepancies that make our process look less effective than it would otherwise be.
Okay, I'm gonna come on that in a sec because I think that makes a lot of sense too. Richard?
I guess where I come out is I kind of question, do we really need this meeting?
Well, can you elaborate on that? And then that's the direction I think I might have gone without eliminating what we're doing, providing, but maybe not having a meeting. Can you just comment further, Richard?
Yeah, I think that providing the information is a good way to go, and perhaps not having an in-person meeting is something to consider.
Okay.
So they end up with the independence preserved and the process preserved.
Okay.
While at the same time giving a preview of what is to come.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. I think what the sense I'm getting then is that this entry would eliminate a time, and it would be an on or by date. So on or by a particular date, Capcom would provide preliminary up-down recommendation list to town admin for the select board and the FinCom. This is for, I want to clarify something. Back up. We do this already for town admin. So that town admin has an idea of whether there's going to be some discontinuity, not to correct necessarily the discontinuity, but so that we know we need to come up with kind of a bifurcated funding source tree. Because if If we say, well, we're not going to recommend this $10 million project, the funding sources are going to look a lot different than if we say we are and town min is also. So this is a tool for, I believe that primarily it was a tool for those types of things. What I've suggested is we broaden that out so that same list goes to the select board and the FinCom prior to the Christmas break. And this would be a follow-up on all the other information we provided them to date. So what I would suggest we do is that we keep that portion in and we eliminate the comments about respective Capcom rep available for Qs and As, ups and downs. If the finance committee wants to ask their rep or the select board wants to ask their rep questions, they can do that. We don't need to have articulated that point. They can do it regardless. So what this would be then is an on or by December 11th, which is pretty much around the date we've always provided this to town admin. We would provide the preliminary up-down recommendation list to town admin. It would include the dollar numbers. It would be for town admin's use and to be distributed to the select board and the FinCom. Does that track with what you guys are thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. You know, town admin, it's good for them to know that for the sake of planning, funding, options and, you know, stuff like that. But I think that suits both needs.
Okay. Peter Geiser?
Yeah, no, I like the way I like the way you put it second time around.
Okay, thanks. Richard, or do you still prefer no?
No, I agree with the way it's being presented.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll make that modification. That being unanimous. Okay, December 16th, really December 11th addresses all of what we just talked about, which is this concept of not having a meeting in advance, maintaining our independence. However, what I've done is moved up a joint meeting to November 20th, where everyone can get together who wants to, and we can spitball capital projects without having Capcom's process, the integrity of Capcom's process be called or perceived to be in question. The 17th is, I guess, the wrap up for Flex Date, wrap up of anything new. You know, there always seems, well, not always, but regularly there seems to be projects that requests that just come in. Primarily they're either citizen or select board or town admin. And it's not that they're late in getting them to us. It's that they may not have had enough information, for instance, from a engineering study or something along those lines. So this gives us an opportunity within our schedule to address those. This is the time we would normally do our recap of the Rorys, and it would be like an absolute super duper last chance for a department head to resolve an open item. And by open item, I mean like a small open item, not like whether they need $1 million for a project or $100,000 for a project. It's whether they included a tear sheet that we felt was fundamentally necessary to vote on a project. Copaesthetic, all right, no dissent, that carries. The 21st, we carry that over. The 4th, we resolve any of our internal open items, including the department head last chances that came in before the break. So the department head turned something in, we haven't had a chance to discuss it. That's our chance to discuss it and finalize our out year request discussion. On January 7th, updates from town admin on any open items, I suppose. Our discussion is to begin to prep and begin the report. Finance, Capcom chair coordinating finance and Capcom. So that's another one where I just wanted to kind of memorialize that at that point, earlier in early December, we've initiated finance report support, and here we're finalizing finance support. So that January 14th, we are receiving our final funding source information, including free cash. and tax rate information. None of this is new, so any thoughts on any of those? No dissent. I see no dissent. The 14th, we would also discuss our draft, finalize, would discuss the draft, the funding sources, and resolve amongst ourselves funding sources recommended by town admin and finance. This would result in our report, a draft of our report being finalized. We look at any report, we look at the report in its final form, any modifications that were required, come up with any final edits, vote the final edits, and then I would modify the report subject to the edits that you all requested, and it would be submitted to the select board the following day to be presented on the 27th. Those dates are taken, each of those is taken pretty much verbatim from last year's schedule with the calendar updated. Any thoughts or questions on those? Okay. So again, no dissent. That's a unanimous support. Unless there is dissent, none. Okay. So guys, that's it. So what's gonna happen with schedule is, Peter, you're still good to meet Monday with FinCom?
Yep.
Okay, good, because it's going to be, I think, critical. I don't want to be long-winded in explaining some of these things, so I'm going to rely on you for some support, please. You guys, just so you're aware, I think we touched on this briefly before. We're trying to close, we're trying to gap the information bridge and put this perception that Capcom is slow and late and not cooperative behind us. One, because I don't think it's true. And second of all, because I don't think it's a perception that helps anyone in this process. How we're going to do that is we're going to meet with the chair of the FinCom and their vice chair and our combined rep, so Peter McEachern, who's on both committees, Monday. And I think, we'll discuss, hopefully not too much of where we were, but where we're going and the steps we've taken and how we believe these at one time, on one vein, provide information to FinCom early and often so they can do due diligence, and at the same time preserves the independence, the integrity of our independence in our report, which you all have expressed time and again is an important attribute of what we do and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's what we're doing at that meeting. I guess I mentioned it to you, one, obviously, because I want you to be aware. Two, I'd like to know if there's anything else you'd like us to discuss. Or we can always talk about, well, I guess we're going to talk with them Monday, so we can't talk about this again. Mm-hmm. Okay. So with that, I think we've wrapped schedule. We've talked about what's next. Next week, I want to just touch on database and some miscellaneous organizational matters. I'd like to just present them and then get feedback from you guys. I don't want to be talking. There's no green sheet reports. I think we've covered good of the order in our normal discussion. Date of our next meeting as Capital Program Committee is August 27th at 10 a.m. Is 10 a.m. work? Richard, I want to ask a group question. Is 10 a.m. working for everyone? We're currently scheduled. We have reserved the 10 a.m. slot through the end of the year. Zoom books up pretty quick.
10 a.m. works best for me.
It works best for you. Peter Kaiser?
Yeah, I think maybe once a month I'll have to dip out at 10:30 to chair a regional team meeting, but probably not worth completely changing it just for that.
Christy Kickham?
Either 10 or 11 is fine with me.
Okay.
Yep.
And then for me, actually, earlier would be better. Not too early. I got to get a bunch of plates spinning and keep them in the air. But I think 9:30 would be the earliest. But since we have 10, and I did get feedback from Peter McEachern, and he's okay with 10. He'd prefer to meet earlier if we could, but I I think he understands, you know, the idea that there's a bunch of us and we're trying to coordinate. And I think what seals the deal is we've already got the time booked. But I can't meet much earlier than I can't meet earlier than 9:30 in any event. Okay, that's good. So again, our date of our next meeting is next week, Thursday, the 27th at 10. Minutes, I just ask if we could approve the 4th. I've been inundated and not followed up on the 19th and those forward. Is a motion to approve the minutes of the 4th?
So moved.
Okay, and then since this is kind of like a super official under the state type of thing versus anything else, I would ask, in order that I see in favor or against, Christy Kickham,
Yes.
Peter Kaiser,
Yes.
Richard Hussey in favor of your motion.
Yes.
Rushing to get us out of here. Stephen Welch, aye. And then if anyone would be so kind to give us a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
All right, we'll do the vote again. Christy Kickham,
Yes.
Richard Hussey,
Yes.
Pete Kaiser, did I hear you say yes? I think I did. And Stephen Welch. Okay, great. Hey, thanks a bunch, everybody. Brian, I'll just follow up with you.
See you next week.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for your help.